Thank you for the introduction, and hello, Outlier. I would have loved to have been there in person with you today in Portugal, but this talk is actually best suited for remote presentation, because that's exactly what I'm here to tell you about. I'm excited to tell you about a new approach for talking about data with remote audiences, which I describe as a form of webcam augmented reality for touchless interaction with visualization. And when I say stand behind your data, I don't mean it metaphorically, but from your audience's perspective, to look as though you're actually standing behind your data. So what you see here is an interactive map of the number of respondents by country from the 2022 DVS State of the Industry Survey. I'm originally from Canada, where there were 66 respondents last year. I'm currently based in the United States, in Seattle, where we had over 700 respondents in the United States. And if you're watching today in Portugal, it looks like there were 10 respondents last year from Portugal. All right, before I continue, I need to set a little context for this talk. I'm a member of Tableau Research. We are a small 6-person industrial research team founded in 2012. Organizationally, we're part of Tableau's product organization, and we're not a user research team or a market research team. Instead, we're a research team that's design and engineering focused, and our group's mandate is similar to other industrial research groups of the past and present. We collaborate with academic researchers, we bring on student interns, we publish papers, we sponsor conferences, and we develop IP for the company. So you can learn about more of what we do at tableau.com/research. And I say this because our group doesn't make product decisions, and before you ask me any questions like, when is any of this going to be in Tableau product? My answer is, I don't know. That decision is above my pay grade. Sorry. So I joined Tableau Research in 2019, and at the time I was curious about how people within organizations communicate and collaborate around data in places like this, the boardroom, where seemingly decisions get made around data. Of course, all of that changed a few months later. This happened, and suddenly organizations shifted to completely virtual communication. And virtual or hybrid communication within organizations continues today. So as a result, the focus of my research shifted to exploring ways of how people talk about data with remote colleagues and customers. And if you're going to talk about data, you're likely going to be using visual aids. And when speaking to remote audiences, you're probably going to do it via screen sharing. So here's just a silly example of me screen sharing a slide presentation containing a bunch of charts. So at the beginning of the pandemic, this form of presentation really made me reflect on what was lost from in-person presentations, or situations in which the presenter isn't relegated to some little thumbnail peripheral video over on the side. So many of you will be familiar with perhaps one of the most engaging presenters of data of all time, the late Hans Rosling. And even if you have seen his original mid-2000s TED Talks, I do recommend revisiting them and paying special attention to his physical stage presence. Look at the gestural and proxemic cues he gives by walking across the stage and framing things and pointing with both of his hands. He's directing the audience's attention. And recall that this is done at a time when the general public really wasn't accustomed to seeing scatter plots, let alone animated ones. So seeing this again, I realized that all of his body language, all these gestural cues, or him walking across the stage, they just merely aren't visible to an audience when you're presenting via screen sharing. All the audience might get is your mouse cursor or some planned animated reveals in your slide deck to direct their attention. Now, over the past couple of years, we've seen similar embodied approaches to guiding the attention of a broadcast audience by TV news correspondents. So there's people like Casey Briggs for ABC News Australia pointing to trends on a large touchscreen display behind him. Or Ed Conway for Sky News in the UK with this wall-sized display behind him, which he seemingly sweeps data points from one chart to another as he walks between them. So of course, most people don't have a large touchscreen display or wall-sized display at home behind them to use in presentations with their colleagues or customers. So I was wondering if I could emulate this experience cheaply with just a webcam and a green screen, no visual effects team. I was captivated by how Rosling and those news correspondents use their hands to simultaneously direct attention, but also appear as though they're controlling the state of the chart. And that's certainly possible if you have a touchscreen behind you, but I was wondering, could I do this with just a webcam and a green screen? So here I experimented with a pose recognition model that would trigger chart animations or the reveal of reference lines or reference bands based on just the orientation of my hands. Unfortunately, this turned out to be pretty brittle. The model itself was brittle, but also the poses really come off as kind of stilted and unnatural. I also had to be constantly looking over to a reference display, and I was always occluding some of the chart behind me. So I had to return to the drawing board. And I revisited another really great Hans Rosling video, his 2010 200 Countries, 200 Years, 4 minutes documentary that he produced for the BBC. Now in this short video, there's an animated scatterplot that's composited over a full profile video of Rosling. And in this video, his really careful choreography makes it seem as though he's controlling the chart with his hands. But of course, this was 2010, and this effect that you see was achieved in post-production with a visual effects team. So I wondered, well, with the technology at our disposal in the 2020s, could this be done live? So I enlisted the help of University of Michigan PhD candidate Brian Hall and Professor Lynn Bartram from Simon Fraser University. And one of Lynn's areas of expertise has to do with gesture and animation and STEM education. Turns out that a number of studies have shown the benefit of directed and illustrative hand motion when you're lecturing about abstract or technical concepts in, say, math or physics. So together we started toying with the idea of, well, what if we composite visualizations over live webcam video, and we combine this with some of the recent computer vision technology, libraries for hand tracking in this environment. So with that, let me now to demonstrate what we made. I'm going to switch my video to grayscale because I find this helps when there's color in a composited chart. I'm going to give an example presentation for the next few minutes about the cost of higher education spanning a 50-year period in the state of Washington, which is where I'm currently based. This curve that you see here in front of you represents the average cost of tuition at post-secondary education institutions in the state of Washington between 1965 and 2018, which you can see started at around an average around $2,000 a year, peaked at around $9,000, or more than a quadrupling over this period. Of course, this average disguises the differences between different institution types, like R1 research universities in purple, comprehensive four-year universities, and community colleges in yellow. So, as you can see, the different institution types are actually pretty well tracking each other for the first few years here in this period. They really start to diverge, though, in the early 1980s, especially research universities, really leading up to this peak in the mid-teens. Let's also consider the experiences of different demographic generations and the years that they would have been attending these institutions. So things are pretty flat if you're a baby boomer attending college in the state of Washington. Your cost of tuition isn't changing a whole lot over this period. But if we zoom in on Gen Xers, this is when things start to steadily rise. So at the start of this period, tuition was between around that 2,000 average, but things were rising, especially at R1 research universities, going up to about $6,000 a year at the end of that period. And then if we pan to the millennial era, so students attending college between 1999 and 2018 or so, especially during this period of, say, if you were a millennial attending university, a research university between, say, 2008 and 2012, your tuition nearly doubles during that time, especially at an R1 research university, starting off between $8,000 in 2008 and up to about $14,000 in 2012. So this is quite a difference when we take this and put it back into context, when you zoom out on the full 50-year period. Okay, next I want to do a little bit of a case study on and dive into the plight of millennials, so attending college in the last 20 years, and only at a single research university. We're going to focus on the University of Washington here in Seattle. one of two R1 public research universities in the state. What you're seeing here is the curve of enrollment at the University of Washington over this period, starting at around 40,000 at the beginning of the period and growing to be about 60,000 at the end of this period. So let's just keep this in mind and stash it over here for now, just for context. We'll come back to that enrollment in a few minutes. What you're seeing here is the number of the cost of tuition on average for students attending the University of Washington over this period. So a rise. But even this curve doesn't tell the full story. What's missing here is state support, or the money coming in from the state of Washington for each student. So as you can see, there's been this inversion over the past 20 years as to where the money is coming from. And if we just combine this, you see that there's been this steady decrease over this period on overall funding per student. Now let's split this into individual years. And I want to actually zoom in on 2 years in particular. So let's take 2013, for instance, and we'll go 10 years earlier. And this, I just want to contrast directly how much it's inverted. Like, so the amount of money that was coming in from tuition in 2003 certainly grown, but now the amount that was coming in from state support in 2003, that's about what students have to pay now, about 14,000 in 2013 rather. And the amount of money coming in from the state is less than what tuition was 10 years earlier. So quite a inversion. And lastly, if we could remember that enrollment count data that I had introduced a few minutes ago? Well, what if we consider that in this calculation about how much money is actually coming into the university? Because we see on a per student basis, the cost is actually decreasing. But if we take the enrollment data and multiply the per student costs, we actually see that the amount of money coming into the university is still actually steadily increasing, whereas at an individual level, it is decreasing. Okay, enough with this example. I just showed multiple ways in which a presenter could use both of their hands to direct their audience's attention to specific data observations. And this experience was qualitatively quite different from screen sharing and pointing with a mouse or using reveals in your slide presentation software. This experience is also quite different from the experience of presenting in a room with a projected display or touchscreen beside me. You might have also noticed that beyond just pointing at individual elements in the scene, I also use gestures to zoom, or to pan in time, or to reveal, or compare. And also these gestures might have been those that I could have even used in the absence of visual aid. They already exist actually as rhetorical cues in conversation or public speaking. Other things that happened, like scene changes, where I moved all the vises off screen, brought a new charts onto the screen. All those are relegated to keyboard shortcuts. So my point here is that not everything needs to be gesture controlled in an interface like this. I still have a keyboard in front of me. And this especially is true if you need to invent a new gesture. You might not need to. This brings me to another point. The technology here isn't complicated. I'm using a standard webcam and off-the-shelf computer vision library. Perhaps some of you will actually be building presentation tools like this in the future. And you could conceivably add a large gestural vocabulary to a tool like this, or you might allow presenters to define their own. But I think you should be careful not to conflict with the body language and natural gestures that people make, sometimes even unconsciously when you're talking about numbers or data. You might be reminded actually of some complex gestural interfaces for exploring data in films like Minority Report or Iron Man. But remember that those interfaces were intended for data analysis rather than data communication. Those characters in those films, they were actually unaware that the cinema audience is watching them. Their gestures were for navigating complex data spaces and not to direct our attention. So another possibility that I've been recently exploring with this form of presentation is whether actually there's a benefit to watching someone incrementally construct charts and then interact with them. And I'm wondering, could this be useful from the standpoint of visualization literacy? Could it help ensure that audiences understand the distinct fields in your data and where they appear in charts? Well, let's take a look. Here's a more recent example presentation that is perhaps more reminiscent of the Tableau construction experience. And for those who are of you watching who are familiar with Tableau, this means dragging fields to drop zones. So here I can reveal a list of fields in my data, which in this case happens to be data from the OECD about flood risk for different Dutch provinces. So I also have in here the count of employees at a fictional company across these same provinces. And I'll bring provinces here as well. So as you can see, when I'm dragging these fields out, these drop zones, I'm incrementally building up these charts. And if they share fields, they are automatically highlighted when I point at one or the other. So for me, this elicits a question of whether it's sufficient to show pre-constructed charts, or if it's indeed useful to incrementally construct charts during a presentation for the benefit of the audience. So I'd love to hear what you think. So I'll leave you with an exercise. The next time you talk about data to an audience, be conscious of what your hands are doing and think about how that movement could help or distract an audience if you were to stand behind your data. And lastly, I'm certainly not the only researcher doing work in this area. If there are any other researchers watching and would like to meet or collaborate or with others working in this space, I'm happy to announce that I'll be co-organizing a workshop on this topic later this year at the IEEE Viz conference in Melbourne. It's called Multimodal Experiences for Remote Communication Around Data, or MERCADO. And you'll find out more at the URL here, sites.google.com/view/MERCADO workshop. So thank you very much, and I really welcome your questions and comments and hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you.